So there I was, sitting in what I can only describe as the universe's most aggressive conference room, when the 7-foot-tall dolphin man across from me slammed both gray fists on the table and shouted something about the prophesied march of unbroken will. I blinked at him. I'm sorry, the what now? Commander Threx Valen, and yes, I had to ask him to spell it twice, loomed over me with his two storm gray eyes locked on my face like I'd personally insulted his mother. The bioluminescent speckles along his jawline were pulsing an aggressive blue, which I'd learned in my 3 months of xenobiology training meant he was either very upset or very constipated. Given the circumstances, I was betting on upset. The march, he repeated, his lipless mouth barely moving, of unbroken will. You performed it, yesterday, across 12 miles of active volcanic terrain, while carrying a wounded Vrexthai in your arms. Oh, I scratched the back of my neck. You mean the cat thing? His gill slits fluttered so hard I thought they might detach from his face. Behind him, a younger Vorakthorn Lieutenant Corax, according to his badge, made a sound like a deflating balloon and steadied himself against the wall. His tail hadn't stopped twitching since I'd entered the room. The cat thing, Threx Valen said, and his voice had gone very, very quiet. She calls the Vrexthai, the sacred apex predator of our ancestral waters, the living symbol of our warrior god's eternal hunger. A cat thing. I mean, it had stripes, and it was fuzzy. I offered helpfully. Also, it kept making these little chirping noises when I scratched behind its ears. So I figured, you scratch behind its ears. It seemed like it wanted me to. Threx Valen closed his eyes. The bioluminescent speckles along his temples began strobing in a pattern I hadn't seen before, rapid, erratic, like a distress beacon having a nervous breakdown. His thick fluke tail lifted off the ground and then slammed down hard enough to crack one of the floor tiles. Lieutenant Corax, he said, without opening his eyes. Sir, fetch the High Cantor. Corax's bioluminescence flickered rapidly, and his brow ridges furrowed so deeply they nearly touched. Sir, are you certain that's... Now, the lieutenant fled the room like something was chasing him, which, emotionally speaking, it probably was. I shifted in my chair, which was clearly designed for someone with a tail and therefore left my human backside hanging awkwardly off the front edge. The strategic chamber was all stark gray walls and floating holographic battle maps, with uncomfortable lighting that seemed specifically calibrated to make everyone look like they were about to deliver bad news. There was a single potted plant in the corner, and it was absolutely dying. I respected its commitment to the aesthetic. So, I said, because the silence was getting weird, is this about a permit? Because I definitely filed my field survey documentation before I left the compound. Form 7B, subsection 3, unaccompanied excursions into designated hazard zones. I even got Dr. Vasquez to sign off on it, and you know how she is about signatures. Threx Valen opened his eyes. They had shifted from storm gray to something closer to charcoal, which I assumed was bad. This is not about a permit. Cool, great. What's it about then? He placed both of his large gray hands flat on the table, the webbing between his fingers stretching taut. The dorsal ridge running down his spine had risen slightly, like hackles on a dog, or a dolphin. A very large, very stressed dolphin who controlled an interstellar military fleet. Approximately 4,000 years ago, he began, in the tone of someone explaining something very simple to someone very stupid. Our ancestors received a vision from Vrexathal, the devouring current. In this vision, a figure would emerge in our darkest hour, a figure who would carry the sacred beast across the burning lands, without faltering, without rest, without complaint. This figure would be marked as the burden bearer, the champion of our people, the living avatar of sacrifice and endurance. Okay, I said slowly. For 4,000 years, our greatest warriors have attempted to complete this trial, the March of Unbroken Will. 12 miles across the volcanic fields of Sithrix Prime, carrying a Vrexthai that has been ritually wounded to test the burden bearer's compassion. Ritually wounded? I sat up straighter. Wait, you guys hurt them on purpose? It is a sacred rite. That's messed up. That's super messed up. The poor thing was limping and crying, and you're telling me someone did that deliberately? Threx Valen's bioluminescence strobed again. The wound is minor, symbolic. The Vrexthai is in no real danger. Its leg was broken. A hairline fracture. I could see the bone. That is, he stopped. His gill slits fluttered. That is not standard procedure. Yeah, well, maybe update your procedures, because that little guy was in rough shape when I found him. I crossed my arms. He was hiding under a rock formation near the thermal vents, shaking and making these horrible sounds. And when I picked him up, he just went limp, like he'd given up. Do you have any idea how that felt? Threx Valon stared at me. His mouth opened, then closed. I talked to him the whole way, I continued, because apparently I was on a roll. Told him about my apartment back on Earth and my sister's kids, and this really good sandwich place near my university. He seemed to like the sandwich part. His ears perked up. You spoke to the sacred beast. About sandwiches. The volcanic terrain was boring. What else was I supposed to do? The door to the strategic chamber slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and Lieutenant Korax returned with someone who made Threx Valen look young and vibrant by comparison. High Cantor Sithrix was ancient in the way that mountains are ancient. Her gray hide had faded to an almost translucent white, and her bioluminescent speckles barely glowed at all, just faint pinpricks of light along her withered jawline. She walked with a slight stoop, leaning on a staff carved from what looked like bone, and her two pale eyes were clouded with age. But she was smiling. That seemed like a bad sign. So, Sithrix said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone who looked like a stiff breeze might shatter her. This is the burden bearer. High Cantor, Threx Valen said quickly. I must advise caution. The human claims she was unaware of the significance of her actions. She may not be the prophesied. She carried the wounded Vrexthai 12 miles across the burning lands. Sithrix's clouded eyes fixed on me with unsettling intensity. She spoke words of comfort to ease its suffering. She did not falter, did not rest, did not complain. I complained a little, I said, internally. Sacred humility, Sithrix breathed. Her gill slits fluttered with what I could only describe as religious ecstasy. Just as the text foretold. That's not, I'm not being humble, I'm being accurate. I definitely complained. Out loud, even. I said ow at least 6 times when I stepped on sharp rocks. The burden bearer's feet were pierced by the earth itself, yet still she walked. Sithrix had pulled out a small recording device and was speaking into it with reverent urgency. Add to the 3rd verse. And the stones rose up to test her, and she cried out in her anguish, yet her stride did not waver. My stride absolutely wavered. I tripped twice. Twice she fell, and twice she rose again. Sithrix's dim bioluminescence flickered with approval. Excellent. The symmetry is perfect. I looked at Threx Valon. Is she serious? His expression could only be described as existential despair. High Cantor, please. The human is a junior xenobiologist. She was collecting moss samples. She is not a religious figure. She is now. Sithrix tucked the recording device into her robes and fixed Threx Valen with a look that suggested she'd been winning arguments since before his grandparents were born. The hymn has already been composed, 23 verses documenting her sacred journey. The chorus of the Eternal Tide performed it at dawn. At dawn! The incident only occurred yesterday evening. Inspiration does not wait for bureaucratic approval, Commander. Sithrix's lipless mouth curved into something approaching a smirk. The faithful were moved. The hymn was sung. The words have entered the eternal record. Lieutenant Korax made another deflating balloon noise. His tail was now twitching so rapidly it had begun knocking against the wall in an erratic rhythm. I raised my hand like I was back in elementary school. Quick question. What exactly happens now that I'm whatever I am? Sithrix turned to me with the expression of someone about to deliver either very good news or very bad news, and being unable to tell the difference. Now, burden bearer, you ascend to your rightful place in our spiritual hierarchy. Temples will be erected in your honor. Your words will be recorded and studied. Your image will be carved into the walls of the obsidian sanctum alongside our greatest warrior saints. I'm allergic to being in hierarchies. Sacred jest. Sithrix made a note on her recording device. Add to supplementary materials. The burden bearer speaks in riddles to test the faithful. That wasn't a riddle, that was a complaint. She complains, yet her complaints are wisdom. Sithrix nodded sagely. The text mentioned this as well. The burden bearer would resist her calling, for true greatness does not seek recognition. I looked at Threx Valon again. His bioluminescence had stopped strobing and had settled into a steady, resigned glow, like a nightlight that had accepted its fate. His gill slits hung slightly open. Commander, I said carefully. Please tell me there's a way to undo this. There is, he said, and for a moment I felt relief wash over me. A sacred renunciation ceremony. You would publicly declare yourself unworthy of the title, and the canonization would be reversed. Great, perfect, let's do that. However, he held up one webbed hand. The ceremony can only be performed once the initial hymn cycle is complete, and the High Cantor has final approval over when the cycle is considered finished. I looked at Cithrix. She smiled at me with all the warmth of someone who had absolutely no intention of ever finishing that hymn cycle. The creative process cannot be rushed, burden bearer. Surely you understand. I understand that you're holding my normal life hostage until you're done writing songs about me carrying a cat through a volcano. Of Rex Thigh. Threx Valen corrected automatically. It's a cat. It has whiskers. It purrs. It's a cat. It is a 300-pound apex predator capable of disemboweling a Voracthorn warrior in under 4 seconds. A big cat. Cithrix was making more notes. The burden bearer sees the sacred beast's true nature not as a weapon of divine wrath, but as a creature worthy of love. Remarkable. This will require at least 8 additional verses. I put my head in my hands. Commander, Korak said suddenly, his voice cracking. Sir, I've just received word from Fleet Communications. What now? The young lieutenant's bioluminescence flickered in a pattern I was beginning to recognize as pure, unfiltered panic. The hymn. The one the chorus performed at dawn. What about it? It was broadcast on the standard devotional frequency. Korak swallowed audibly, his gill slits fluttering. The one that goes out to all active military vessels. Threx Valon went very still. How many vessels? All of them, sir. Define all of them. 17 battle fleets, 432 individual ships, approximately 2 million active duty personnel. Korax's tail slammed against the wall hard enough to dent the metal. They've all heard the hymn. They're all singing it. Some of them have started composing their own verses. The room fell silent. Threx Valon's fluke tail lifted slowly off the ground, hung there for a moment, and then came down on the cracked floor tile with enough force to shatter it completely. Well, I said into the silence, this is fine. The Obsidian Sanctum was exactly as dramatic as its name suggested, which I was starting to realize was a running theme with Voracthorn architecture. Massive black walls stretched up toward a ceiling I couldn't actually see, carved with intricate battle scenes depicting what I assumed were very important historical moments of people getting stabbed. Floating braziers of purple flame lined the central aisle, casting everything in shadows that seemed specifically designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Mission accomplished on that front. I don't understand why I have to wear this, I said, tugging at the ceremonial robe they draped over my shoulders. It was made of some kind of shimmering fabric that weighed approximately 40 pounds and kept trying to slide off. I thought the whole point was to renounce my sacred status. Shouldn't I be wearing something humble? Burlap? A potato sack? Commander Threx Valen walked beside me, his gray hide almost invisible in the purple-tinged darkness. His bioluminescent speckles had dimmed to barely visible pinpricks, which I'd learned meant he was actively suppressing strong emotions, probably for the best. If his face started strobing in here, the acoustics would turn it into a full light show. The renunciation ceremony requires formal attire, he said, his voice carefully neutral. You must appear as the burden bearer one final time before rejecting the title. So I have to cosplay as a messiah in order to stop being a messiah. I don't know what cosplay means, but I'm going to assume yes. Lieutenant Korax trailed behind us, datapad clutched in both hands, tail dragging on the ground. He'd been quiet since the revelation about the 17 battle fleets, which I suspected was because he'd run out of ways to express horror. His bioluminescence had settled into a steady, exhausted flicker, like a dying fluorescent light. The hall of echoing names opened up before us, a corridor so long I genuinely couldn't see the end. Massive pillars carved from black stone lined both sides, each one covered in names that glowed faintly in the darkness. The ceiling vanished into shadow somewhere far above. Our footsteps echoed, and kept echoing long after we'd stopped walking. These are our honored dead, Threx Valon said, gesturing at the pillars with one webbed hand. Every Voracthorn warrior who has fallen in defense of our people. Over 60,000 years of sacrifice. I looked at the nearest pillar. The names were carved in flowing script I couldn't read, thousands of them packed into every available inch of stone. And you want to put my name on one of these? The Obsidian Sanctum is reserved for the most sacred figures in our history. The burden bearer would traditionally receive her own pillar. His gill slits fluttered. Assuming the ceremony today fails, you would be the first non-Vorik Thorn ever honored in this hall. Great. Fantastic. No pressure. We emerged from the Hall of Echoing Names into the main chamber of the Sanctum, and I immediately understood why they'd given it such an intimidating name. The space was massive, easily the size of a football stadium with tiered seating rising up on all sides like a coliseum. Every seat was occupied. Thousands of Vorakthorn faces stared down at me, their bioluminescent speckles creating a sea of faintly glowing blue dots in the darkness. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, and on that platform waited High Cantor Sithric. She'd changed into even more elaborate robes than before, layers of dark fabric shot through with threads that caught the purple firelight. Her bone staff had been replaced with something that looked disturbingly like a weapon, a long pole topped with a curved blade that glinted in the brazier light. "Ah," she said as I approached, her clouded eyes fixing on me with that unsettling intensity. "The burden bearer arrives, right on schedule." "I'm here to renounce," I said firmly. "Publicly, formally. Whatever you need me to say, I'll say it." "Of course." Sithrix's lipless mouth curved. "The ceremony is quite simple. You will address the assembly, declare yourself unworthy of the sacred title, and request that your name be struck from the eternal record." "Perfect. Easy. Let's do it." There is, however, one small complication. I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of complication?" Before Sithrix could answer, a side door burst open and something orange and furry came barreling across the chamber floor at approximately 60 miles per hour. The Vrexthai the cat, I was calling it a cat, and no one could stop me, slammed into my legs with enough force to knock me backward onto the platform. 300 pounds of apex predator collapsed on top of me, purring so loudly the vibrations rattled my teeth. Its whiskers tickled my face as it aggressively nuzzled my chin. "Oh no," I heard Korax whisper. "Miser RP," said the cat. "How did it get out of medical bay?" Threx Valen demanded. "I ordered double security." "It bit through the door, sir." One of the guards had emerged from the same doorway the cat had used, looking disheveled and slightly traumatized. "And then through the secondary door. And then through Corporal Venix's restraining harness." "She's fine, sir." "Mostly." I tried to push the cat off me. It responded by flopping more firmly onto my chest and extending one massive paw to knead at my ceremonial robe. Its claws were approximately the length of my fingers. "Good kitty," I wheezed. "Very good kitty. Please stop crushing my lungs." "The beast acknowledges its savior," Sithrix intoned, and her voice carried across the entire chamber with perfect clarity. The assembled Vorakthorn erupted into murmurs, their bioluminescent speckles flickering in synchronized waves. Just as the prophecy foretold, the Vrexthai recognizes its burden bearer and refuses to leave her side. It's not acknowledging anything, it's just being clingy because I fed it protein bars during the hike. She sustained the sacred beast with offerings from her own provisions. Sithrix was making notes again. Add to verse 12. "And the beast knew hunger, and the burden bearer shared of her own sustenance, though it meant her own starvation." I had plenty of protein bars. I brought a whole box. She carried abundance into the wasteland, prepared for every trial. Note-taking intensified. Verse 13. "For the burden bearer is providence itself, and where she walks, scarcity cannot follow." That's not. I just like being prepared. Threx Valen had moved to stand beside Sithrix, and his bioluminescence was doing something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't strobing or flickering, but pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. His storm gray eyes met mine. "The ceremony," he said quietly. "You need to complete the ceremony, now, before this gets worse." "Worse how?" As if in answer, the assembled crowd began to sing. It started low, somewhere in the upper tiers, a deep humming that resonated in my chest. More voices joined in, layer upon layer, until the entire Obsidian Sanctum was vibrating with sound. The acoustics did exactly what they were designed to do, amplified everything until the hymn surrounded me from all directions. Inescapable, overwhelming. I couldn't understand the words, but I recognized the melody. It was haunting and beautiful and absolutely about me, which was the worst part. "They're singing the third movement," Korax said, his voice barely audible over the chorus. "The part about the stones testing your feet." I need to stand up. I shoved at the cat again. Please move." The Vrextai yawned, displaying approximately 800 teeth, and rolled off me with exaggerated reluctance. It stayed pressed against my leg as I struggled to my feet, my ridiculous ceremonial robe now covered in orange fur. Cithrix raised her blade staff, and the singing gradually faded. "Brothers and sisters of the eternal tide," she called out, her voice carrying effortlessly. "We gather today to witness the words of the burden bearer. She has requested the right to address this assembly." The crowd fell silent. Thousands of pairs of eyes fixed on me, horizontal pupils dilating in the purple light, bioluminescent speckles pulsing with anticipation. I cleared my throat. The sound echoed for approximately 9 years. "Hi," I said. "I'm Willa, and I'm not who you think I am." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I'm a junior xenobiologist. I've been stationed here for 3 months, and I spend most of my time looking at moss. That's my job. Moss. I categorize it. I take samples. Sometimes I look at it under a microscope and write down what I see." Silence. The cat pressed harder against my leg. 3 days ago, I went out for a routine field survey in Sector 7. I was supposed to collect samples from the thermal vent region. I was not supposed to find a wounded animal, and I definitely wasn't supposed to carry it 12 miles back to the compound. I took a breath. But I did, because it was hurt and it was scared, and I couldn't just leave it there. That's not heroic. That's just basic decency. Anyone would have done the same thing. Cithrix made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "Anyone would have done the same," she repeated, projecting her voice to the crowd. "The burden bearer claims her actions were not exceptional, that any being would have shown such compassion." She paused. "And yet, in 4,000 years, no one has. Our own warriors attempted the march and failed. Our priests, our champions, all of them broken by the journey. Only she succeeded. Because I didn't know it was a test." I gestured wildly, nearly hitting the cat in the face. "I thought I was just helping a hurt animal. There was no religious significance, no prophecy fulfillment, no sacred anything. I was just a person with a cat and a lot of protein bars." She did not seek glory. Cithrix continued, ignoring me completely. She did not prepare rituals or offerings. She approached the sacred beast with nothing but her own 2 hands and her willing heart. That's because I didn't know I was supposed to prepare rituals. She came with empty hands and a full spirit. More notes. Verse 24 is writing itself. I turned to Threx Valen. His bioluminescence had gone completely still, and his expression was unreadable. "Commander, please, help me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped forward, placing himself between me and the crowd. "The human speaks the truth," he said, and his voice carried the weight of command. "She was unaware of our customs, unaware of our prophecies. Her actions, however remarkable, were not intended as a fulfillment of sacred duty." Hope flickered in my chest. However, he turned to face me, and something in his eyes had shifted. Intent does not change outcome. The march was completed. The beast was saved. The prophecy has been fulfilled, regardless of whether the one who fulfilled it understood what she was doing. "Commander, I have spent the last 30 hours trying to find a way to undo this." His gill slits fluttered, a brief show of vulnerability. "I have consulted every theological text in our archives. I have spoken with every living expert on the prophecies. The conclusion is unanimous." He reached out and placed one large gray hand on my shoulder. The webbing between his fingers was warm. "You are the burden bearer, Willa. Not because you wanted to be, not because you tried to be, but because you did what no one else could do, for no reason other than compassion." His bioluminescence began to pulse again, slow and steady. "In some ways, that makes you more worthy of the title than anyone who sought it." The crowd began to hum again, low, reverent. "No," I said. "No, no, no. I reject this. I renounce. That's what I'm here to do, right? I formally renounce." "The renunciation requires you to declare yourself unworthy," Cithrix interrupted smoothly. "To state that you lack the qualities of a true burden bearer." "Fine, I'm unworthy. I lack the qualities. You carried a wounded creature 12 miles without rest." "I rested. I sat down at least 4 times. You shared your food with it despite your own needs." "I had extra food. I literally just explained this." "And when you arrived at the compound, exhausted and injured, what did you do?" I paused. "You refused medical treatment for yourself," Cithrix continued, her clouded eyes glinting. until you were certain the beast would survive. You stayed with it through the night, speaking words of comfort, refusing to leave its side. It was scared. It didn't know where it was. You prioritized another being's well-being over your own. That's what you're supposed to do. Yes, Sithric smiled, and for the first time it wasn't unsettling. It was almost kind. That is what a burden bearer does. The hymn swelled around us, voices rising in harmonies that made my chest ache. The cat pressed against my leg and purred, a rumble I could feel in my bones. Threx Valen squeezed my shoulder. You don't have to understand it, he said quietly. You don't have to accept it. But it is true nonetheless. I can't be a religious figure. I'm not qualified. I don't know your customs or your prayers or your anything. Then we will teach you. He released my shoulder and stepped back, lowering himself to one knee. The movement rippled through the crowd, thousands of Vorakthorn dropping to their knees in synchronized waves, their tails flat against the ground, their bioluminescence pulsing in unified rhythm. Oh no, I whispered. Herald of the Burden Bearer, Sithrix intoned, gesturing at Threx Valon with her blade staff. You have been chosen to guide her path and speak her wisdom to the faithful. Threx Valon's gill slits fluttered violently. I'm sorry, what? The prophecy is clear. The burden bearer shall have a herald, one who witnesses her arrival and carries her message to the stars. Sithrix's smile widened. You witnessed. You documented. You brought her before the assembly. The role is yours, Commander. I was trying to decanonize her, and yet here we are. Threx Valon's bioluminescence strobed so intensely that the entire chamber flickered blue for a moment. His tail slammed against the platform hard enough to crack the stone. This is not what I intended, he said through clenched teeth. Very few sacred events are. Sithrix tucked her notes away and raised her staff high. Let it be known throughout the 17 fleets. The burden bearer has been recognized. Her herald has been chosen. A new chapter of our faith begins today. The crowd erupted into cheers, their bioluminescence flashing in celebration, their voices raised in song. I stood in the center of it all, covered in cat fur, wearing a 40-pound robe, watching the highest military commander in the Vorakthorn fleet kneel at my feet while clearly contemplating several homicides. The cat head-butted my hip and purred. Well, I said to no one in particular. At least I don't have to categorize moss anymore. Threx Valon looked up at me, his storm-gray eyes filled with the resigned exhaustion of someone who had just realized his entire career had been derailed by a woman and her emotional support apex predator. I'm updating my will, he said flatly. I want that on the record. Can I be in your will? Since I'm apparently a religious figure now, it seems like that would be good luck. You are the reason I need to update my will. Herald duties are really starting off strong, I see. His gill slits fluttered in what might have been a laugh, or might have been a sob. At this point, I genuinely couldn't tell the difference. The hymn reached its crescendo around us, and somewhere in the upper tiers, I heard someone shout my name. I sighed, bent down to scratch the cat behind its ears, and accepted my fate. At least the protein bars had been worth it.